Welcome to History 4314, American History Through Film, and today we're going to look at some of Hollywood's greatest films, the films of the post-war era. Hollywood is always at its best during crises, and between 1946 and 1957, Hollywood faced its biggest crisis yet. During those years, Hollywood lost all of its theaters, it lost much of its export market, and it lost half of its audience. This forced Hollywood to experiment tremendously with new kinds of actors and actresses, with new kinds of film genres, and this created some of Hollywood's most vivid and lasting images. And we're going to start out by talking about the cultural icons that Hollywood created during the 1950s, because those icons remain with us even now, more than 4 decades later. We're going to talk about James Dean, and Marilyn Monroe, and Marlon Brando, and many other people who shaped our whole vision of modern-day Hollywood. So let's talk about celebrity for a few moments. If you look at the endorsement stars of the 21st century, you'll be struck by how many of them are dead. Their images and work are manipulated in ways that couldn't have been imagined while they were alive, all in the name of making a buck. Television has become the land of the undead. Fred Astaire has partnered up with a Dirt Devil vacuum cleaner. Elvis Presley has swiveled through a Pizza Hut commercial. And Ed Sullivan has hawked Mercedes-Benzes. Jimmy Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, Louis Armstrong all have been raised from the dead to savor the refreshing taste of Diet Coke, the same soft drink Paula Abdul hoisted with a colorized Cary Grant. John Wayne and the all-dead cast of Bonanza appeared in separate spots for Coors Light. Lucille Ball went shopping at Service Merchandise. In computer ads, Albert Einstein sells you a PC, while Marilyn Monroe urges us to try a certain perfume, and Audrey Hepburn pitches sunglasses. And did you know that James Dean wore Nikes? And for that matter, so did Lee Harvey Oswald, but the pants maker in question apparently doesn't want you to make that connection. No decade has ever produced more lasting cultural icons than the 1950s. James Dean still personifies disaffected, rebellious youth. You can see his lookalikes on Fox every evening. Marilyn Monroe has been the #1 female celebrity icon of our time, the battered blonde bombshell whose name has become synonymous with sex, yes, and sadness too. Name a pop cultural icon, and more often than not, what comes to mind is a single indelible image which neatly summarizes the entertainer's whole career. For instance, we think of Marilyn Monroe smiling serenely while the breeze from a subway grating lifts the billowing hem of her dress in the 7-Year Itch. Or James Dean wailing in fury and frustration at his apron-clad father in Rebel Without a Cause. In some cases, an individual's enduring status as a pop icon reflects genuine achievements, but mainly that's not the case. The people that we remember, we don't remember for any particular accomplishment, but rather because they seem to personify an entire era. Now, of course, celebrity is partly the product of a publicity machine. In the old days, under the Hollywood studio system, studios set up carefully orchestrated photo ops of celebrities, often under totally manufactured circumstances. So Rock Hudson, who was gay, dated sexy young starlets, or Joan Crawford, who apparently was quite abusive, was at home sweet home. With the growth of the media after the Second World War, however, popular icons took on a new significance. During the 1950s, a wholly new kind of celebrity emerged, symbolized by James Dean and Marilyn Monroe. During the 1950s, the cult of celebrity was no longer limited to cheesy fan magazines and supermarket tabloids. And today, this celebrity culture permeates our entire society. In fact, it may well be our entire culture in the early 21st century. Celebrity is now one of America's great growth industries, perhaps our only great growth industry, as well as our main cultural and economic export to the rest of the world. Now, why does this happen? Modern media technology increasingly brings the public into close familiarity with the private and the personal. People now respond to people in the public realm who would normally be strangers to them, as if they were family members and friends. Intimate strangers, we might think of these celebrities. You know more about them than you know about many of your relatives. The movies and television provide millions of people with a sense of intimacy. When people feel stronger connections to media friends than they do to people who are part of their everyday lives, that can surely be quite unhealthy. And living vicariously through the lives of media celebrities can create a sense of being a spectator in life and not an active part in it. The icons of the 20th century are carved in a kind of mental Mount Rushmore, etched into our imagination. Celebrities like Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, they provide a link to a familiar but vanished time. They make us all part of a common community. So how do you become an icon? Let me offer you a bit of advice if you wish to be the next James Dean or the next Marilyn Monroe. First, live fast. The icons of the 20th century led the kind of glamorous lives that kept them fixed in our culture's consciousness. Such feats splashed across the front pages of tabloids and broadsheets alike ensure the first prerequisite of icon status: be famous. Second, die young. With only 3 films to his name, James Dean died at 24. Selena died at 23. Dying young isn't a prerequisite. Jackie Onassis lived a full life, as has Muhammad Ali, and both are sure to remain symbolic of our times. But there's no question, dying young helps. A tragic death allows your image to be paused at the pinnacle of your achievement, with failure anathema to your being. With your life interrupted by tragic death, pop culture is left to ponder the sum of your future achievements by the measure of your past. If James Dean's first 3 movies were fabulous, imagine what he would have created. Inevitably, They follow the past trend into the future because your life thus far has been a steep rise in achievement and fame. People expect that trend to continue, projecting it forward until your career and life rises far higher than any actual life ever has. 3, leave a good-looking corpse, or better yet, leave no corpse at all. This allows the magazines and newspapers to accompany their obituaries with your most glamorous pictures, best profiles facing forward, allowing entire populations to see in their identity an ideal, unfettered by death, to soar high above the bonds of unyielding reality. You rise past potential to become myth. So we are left with pictures not of an aging Marilyn Monroe, but a beautiful, vulnerable, doomed Marilyn Monroe, or a forever sulky, pouting James Dean. Icons. The word started out, after all, as a term for religious paintings of saints, but all icons must have visual appeal. Their image has to be widely circulated and to have a kind of compelling power that makes generation after generation of young people want to put it on their wall. Your image must transcend time, so it means something to people who are born years later in the future. 5th, icons must have a moral edge. That is, a cultural icon must somehow embody a larger theme. That theme can be frailty, it could be flawed morality, it could be gutsiness, it could be rebellion. But the celebrity needs to embody something larger than herself or himself. So Princess Diana was an angel of mercy to some, a perfect fashion plate to others, a wronged wife to still others, a wonderful mother to others still. Marilyn Monroe was a sex symbol because of her physical beauty, but she also symbolized larger moral issues. She was the center of gossip in Hollywood. Was she or wasn't she sleeping with the Kennedys? And if so, how many? But she was also known to have had a tragic life with suicide attempts, failed marriages, and miscarriages. So she arouses a complex set of emotions: envy, pity, desire, and so forth. Now, most of our best beloved cultural icons are dead, from James Dean and Marilyn Monroe to Elvis Presley, and it's no coincidence. This is what's happened to Marilyn Monroe. She was built up after her death. She became larger than life when she was no longer alive. When you look at her in her time, in context, she was pretty irrelevant, just a beautiful person who made a few films and sang for the president. But dying young traumatically, like John Kennedy or Marilyn Monroe, seems to be one ingredient in getting mythic status. An era of mystery about the death, together with martyrdom, seems to be another aspect of enduring celebrity. And that's why certain celebrities, like James Dean, Marilyn Monroe, draw sighs from the public long after they take their last breaths. The stars who never fade generally are rebels with causes or without causes. They stand for something in the public mind. They usually mean something tumultuous. Icons, in other words, have some kind of strong emotional connection to those of us who lead more typical, normal lives. Now, it's no accident, I think, that the movies have created our most enduring cultural icons. Movie-going is one of the most intense and ritualized experiences we undergo in our society. The incense-like smell of popcorn, high mass turnout on Friday and Saturday nights, people spread out in the theaters on empty afternoons, and unlike TV, we don't have the option of channel surfing. We are surrounded by a darkened theater and tunneled into a world that is so much larger and so much more exciting than we think our own lives are. So celebrity meets some deep human needs, and my argument is that those needs have intensified over time because we live in an increasingly fragmented, increasingly individualized culture. People want to experience culture collectively, and movies are something we do with other people. We yearn for human interaction, and the movies provide that for us. We all may be silent in the theater, but we commune together. Hollywood celebrities and the language of pop culture are becoming a universal language. So our celebrities are not just American anymore, they are global. And they're spread across the world through a process of American global colonization. So as more people live alone, we have more need for connection, a connection that we find through this culture of celebrity. Psychologists and other soul doctors can't quit talking about the disintegration of the family. But things aren't quite that bleak, because we're all honorary members of an extended family that's created by mass culture. Indeed, I suspect that most people feel stronger attachments to the world of the movies and television than they do to even their closest relatives. So let's talk about one of Hollywood's first and most enduring icons. We're going to talk about James Dean. And you all know what he looks like, but let's see a brief clip from the 1955 classic Rebel Without a Cause so you can see what James Dean was like. If we could have the film. Salminio. Okay, let's cut it there. James Dean rose to stardom in East of Eden in 1955, and his death in an auto accident at age 24 ensured his cult status. Dean grew up in a heartless household in Indiana. His mother, Mildred, smothered her son with love, short-circuiting his socialization skills, while his father, Winston, abandoned him during his greatest times of need. Mildred's death at age 29, when Jimmy was but 9 years old, affected the boy for the rest of his short life. Winston, then living in California, shipped Dean off to live with his aunt and uncle in Indiana and rarely had meaningful contact with his son again. A strong sense of rejection dogged Dean throughout his life. It shaped his stunted emotional growth, and it served as a springboard for his anguished acting style, called the method style. Obsessed with excellence, obsessed with self-expression, Dean pursued an acting career with a vengeance. He studied at UCLA and fell under the wing of actor James Whitmore, who urged him to hone his craft in New York City. Before returning to California as a contract player for Warner Brothers, Dean worked in radio, live television shows, and Broadway plays. In more than 30 TV roles, he portrayed the same kind of character again and again, the misunderstood social outcast. Dean was unpredictable, he was difficult, he was unable to take criticism. He defied authority and he felt an endless need to shock his coworkers and friends. One of his favorite stunts was to urinate in public. At one point, his hero, Marilyn Monroe, urged him to see a psychiatrist. But director Elia Kazan saw that Dean was suffused with self-pity and the anguish of rejection and cast him in East of Eden. This was James Dean's defining role, that of the perplexed teenager who wants nothing so much as being loved by his parents, from whom he felt forever distant. East of Eden was filmed in 1954. By its opening in the spring of 1955, Dean was a nationwide sensation. His other two films, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, were filmed later in 1955 and released after his death, cementing his long-lasting relationship with alienated youth. Dean was bisexual, and this bisexuality bothered and confused him. Some suggest that his relationships with older men were an outgrowth of his search for love from his estranged father. James Dean became a cultural hero, not because of anything in particular that he had done, not because he'd done something great or something brave, but because in 3 films he presented something true about himself. He portrayed a tortured soul, and this connected with youth in a way that few other actors ever have in all of film history. Let's next turn to the other major icon produced in the 1950s, Marilyn Monroe. You don't have to be a movie buff to know that her name was Norma Jean, or that she was married to 2 larger-than-life men, baseball great Joe DiMaggio and playwright Arthur Miller, or that she died of a drug overdose way too young at the age of 36. Images of her standing, white skirt billowing over a subway steam grate, or cooing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" to John Kennedy in a skin-tight, hand-beaded sheath, these are all part of our shared memory. With her hourglass figure, her platinum hair, her guileless presence, she was a celebrity sexpot, a vulnerable icon. No matter how much fashion changes, no matter how bone-thin runway models get, Marilyn Monroe, vivacious and full-bodied, Playboy magazine's first centerfold, continues to define what it means to be alluring in America. But she's also proof that stardom exacts its price. She's instantly recognizable. Her voice is a warm, breathy gush. She has kissy lips. Her father was a dashing Danish immigrant who disappeared before she was born. Her mother, a film cutter at RKO, had a nervous breakdown when Norma Jean was small. The future celebrity was raised in foster homes around Los Angeles and got married at the age of 16 to an aircraft plant worker she called Daddy. They divorced 4 years later. She started bleaching her hair. She modeled. She got jobs in B movies. Joseph Mankiewicz, brother of Herman Mankiewicz of Citizen Kane, put her in a small part in Asphalt Jungle, 1950, then put her in All About Eve, which resulted in a 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. 2 movies in 1953, Niagara and then Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, made her a star. Still, 2 years later, when she went to dinner honoring her work in the 7-year Itch, she had to borrow a gown from the studio because she didn't own one. Her jewelry was not real, it was costume, and she conveyed a lack of pretense which seems to have been genuine. When she married the playwright Arthur Miller in 1956, she wore a beige dress. She couldn't find a beige veil, so she bought a white one and dyed it in coffee. Invited by Grauman's Chinese Theater to make her mark in the concrete with fellow bombshell Jane Russell, she initially suggested that they imprint their best-known assets, her bust and Russell's behind. When Grauman demurred, she settled for her hand and footprints. She dotted the I in her name with a rhinestone. Norman Mailer would write a book about her. So too did Gloria Steinem and dozens of other people that you've never heard of. Andy Warhol silk-screened her. Elton John wrote a song about her, Candle in the Wind, which was later revised, of course, to memorialize Princess Diana. Marilyn Monroe was depicted in many ways as a dumb blonde, as an angel of sex, as a little girl lost, as a sacrificial lamb, as a thwarted artist, as a self-destructive diva. And all these have some truth to them, I suspect. She's been depicted as an innocent little girl, a cold nymphomaniac, a manipulative drug-addicted near prostitute. In other words, she seems to reveal something about celebrity in America. You need to be infinitely plastic. People need to be able to project their emotions onto you, and that way you speak to them. Marilyn Monroe was genuinely sweet, yet self-obsessed and self-loathing. She was idolized by millions of strangers, even as she was vomiting into toilets. She was desperate to have a baby, but she underwent at least a dozen abortions. She's generally portrayed as a fragile innocent, exploited, and eventually crushed by Hollywood. But she had a deep pedigree of insanity, especially on her mother's side. Her mother, her grandfather, and her grandmother died in mental institutions. Her maternal uncle killed himself. And so while conspiracy theorists still speculate about the causes of her death, the answer seems self-evident. Still, all kinds of theories still surround her death. Was her overdose accidental? Was it deliberate suicide? Was it murder by presidential aides? We simply don't know. So what are the rules of celebrity? Number one, celebrities are not heroes. The celebrity, wrote the famous historian Daniel Borstein, is a person who is known for his well-knownness. Celebrities are celebrities because they're celebrities. It's a snide definition, but it is an accurate one. A hero is distinguished by achievement, but a celebrity is distinguished by an image. A hero creates him or herself, but a celebrity is created by the media. Celebrity is a major industry. The United States may be lagging in the production of steel and shoes these days, but it still maintains a commanding lead in the production of celebrities. This star-making machinery is a major American industry. It turns obscure human beings into celebrities and then uses them to sell movies, TV shows, books, magazines, records, toys, clothing, diet plans, exercise videos, and even political candidates. The celebrity industry's function is clear: to design, create, and market images, to produce and sustain celebrities in all sectors. 3, celebrities embody certain eternal American archetypes. Celebrities come in infinite numbers, but they do not come in infinite varieties. With the decline of the traditional family, with the breakdown of larger communities, we rely more and more on celebrities to transmit our stories and our moral fables. Every celebrity tells a story. There are a relatively few archetypal stories that all celebrities consciously or unconsciously transmit. There is the beauty, like Marilyn Monroe. There is the hunk, like Clark Gable. There is the bad boy, like Marlon Brando. There is the bad girl, like Drew Barrymore. There is the troubled one, like Judy Garland. There is the hero, like Michael Jordan. There is the rebel, like Lenny Bruce or James Dean. There's the filthy rich, like Donald Trump or Ross Perot. There's the tragic hero, like Martin Luther King. There's the human soap opera, like Liz Taylor. Celebrities, in short, act out the mythologies of our culture. Just as there are archetypal roles for celebrities to play in the press, there are also archetypal storylines for those celebrities to act out in their personal mythologies. These storylines provide the plots for thousands of celebrity profiles that we read in magazines or in newspapers. We hear about the lucky break that paved the way to stardom, or we hear about the battle with booze and drugs, or the rogue who was saved from a life of debauchery by a religious conversion, or by the love of a good woman, or the hard-won comeback from divorce or scandal, or a film that bombed. But by far the most common of all these celebrity stories is the rise from rags to riches, from humble origins to stardom. This is, of course, the classic American myth. It's the story of Abraham Lincoln going from log cabin to the White House. But we don't have many log cabins these days, and so you can't sell celebrities for rising from log cabins. So let's see how they do it now. The magazine Mirabella reports that producer Dawn Steele's family was forced to move from a comfortable home in Rockville Center, Long Island, to a rented house in Great Neck that she describes as Dickensian. Great Neck is about the most expensive suburb in New York City, near New York City. Entertainment Weekly reports that actress Sarah Jessica Parker and her family had to make do with, quote, a large rundown house full of old furniture, that means antiques, and mismatched linens surrounded by upper middle class neighbors. Or People magazine reports that Dean Cain, he's the latest Superman, grew up in Whores, a Malibu trailer park. I don't really recall seeing any trailer parks in Malibu. They must be nicer than the trailer parks around here. Now, creative use of the log cabin storyline is not limited to showbiz. Early in the 1992 presidential campaign, Bill Clinton was facing a problem because most voters thought that Clinton was a rich kid because he'd gone to Georgetown and Oxford and Yale, and so they had to reinvent him. They began to emphasize his father's accidental death, his mother's struggle to raise him alone, his cold, lonely trips to the family outhouse. Soon he was changed into the man from Hope rather than the man from Yale. Now, among the charming aspects of these storylines is that they're never required to be actually true. Fact-fudging and myth-making are permitted, even encouraged, in creating a good story. Next, 5. Celebrities need scandals. In the old days, a scandal would get you in trouble. We'll talk about a comedian named Fatty Arbuckle in a later lecture, or Ingrid Bergman, who had a child outside of wedlock, Charlie Chaplin, who had a problem with young girls. But now, scandal is practically a necessity for the successful production of celebrity. Scandal is a rite of passage, a way to go from young star to sadder but wiser sophisticate. It's also a great way to get publicity twice. First, you behave scandalously, then you reform, and you make your comeback. And that makes you a greater celebrity. Just ask Richard Dreyfuss, Robin Williams, Bruce Willis, Christian Slater, Wesley Snipes, all of whom bounced back from scandals with booze or drugs or arrests to become celebrities anew. Celebrities thrive on personal problems. The best problems are personal problems that the audience can relate to. Divorce, addiction, or the currently trendy tales of dealing with the pains of childhood abuse or parental alcoholism. In the absence of such personal crises, the star is forced to make do with mere career problems. This is fairly easy because every star has to surmount career problems. If the celebrity just had a flop, can he come back with a hit? If the star just had a hit, can she follow it up with another hit, or will she fade? If the star's last efforts were middling successes, can she break into megastardom with this next one, or be doomed to mediocrity forever? But what about celebrities that have no problems? What if you're rich and beautiful and successful and happily married to a handsome French director? Let's say you are Candice Bergen. Then how do you deal with this? Well, no problem. Let's read from Cosmopolitan magazine. Ever creative, Cosmo decided that Bergen's problem was that she was too beautiful. For most of her 47 years, Bergen acknowledges her appearance has terrified men and caused women to hate her. Professionally, too, beauty got in the way. Beauty set up distance between other people and me. It warped their behavior. And finally, celebrities are major sources of wisdom. In France, philosophers like Michel Foucault or Jean-Paul Sartre are celebrities. But in America, celebrities are philosophers. Jean-Paul Sartre could do some serious philosophizing about the nature of hell, but so too could Shannon Doherty, and she does it in the presence of Hollywood props and a reporter from Vanity Fair. Shannon doesn't believe in hell. I only believe in heaven, she says, sitting by her pool. My theory is that he's our Father, and no matter how many wrongdoings I do, I don't see how he could have his child burn in eternal hell. She tosses a tennis ball into the pool to retrieve, for her dog to retrieve. I tend to think hell is where we are right now. It's remarkable how quickly this celebrity culture has emerged. Back in 1962, a historian named Daniel Borstein, he was Librarian of Congress, wrote for the first time about celebrity culture. And then it seemed to be a sort of distant risk for American society. We risk being the first people in history to have been able to make their illusions so vivid, so persuasive, so realistic that they can live in them. What Borstein could not have predicted was that our technology has allowed us to manufacture our fantasies with perfect life-likeness. At the same time, our society has ripped away the old role models. It's ripped away the old guideposts to the past. The result is that we have created synthetic celebrities whom we worship because they variously act out our noblest or our basest desires. So what happened is that after World War II, our magazines, our newspapers, our network, television, Hollywood, all propelled celebrities into a central position in our national psyche. Now these images are transmitted all across the world, and James Dean and Marilyn Monroe are not simply icons for Americans, but people across the entire world. So what has happened, I would argue to you, is that the culture of celebrity has become a substitute for more mundane realities. Anyone who attends a political convention knows it's better to watch it on TV than to watch the reality. It's a lot more interesting on television. They take out all the boring parts, right? And they focus only on action, personalities, and images. So let's now talk about the films of the 1950s. The most important development in the 7 years that followed from 1946 was the disappearing Hollywood audience. As we talked about in our last lecture, Hollywood's audience fell by half in just 7 years. But it didn't just decline in size. The nature of the audience changed. That is, the audience was no longer the vast, homogeneous audience of the 1930s, an audience that watched all the same movies. The new Hollywood audience was a segmented audience. It was made up of different parts with different interests. There would be a youth audience. There would be the art house crowd. There would be an audience for social problem films, an audience for musicals, and these weren't the same people. The classic Hollywood film was based on a pre-war America that no longer existed. The audience had fragmented, and the homogeneous mass audience had disappeared. So a new kind of segmentation occurs in the 1950s, and for the first time, you have an audience interested in serious, realistic, frequently pessimistic movies. And so Hollywood was faced by a series of dilemmas. How do you attract people to the movies? How do you appeal to this fragmented, segmented audience? To do this, Hollywood would have to devise new film formulas. And it would have to devise new formulas without alienating its old audience, who clearly wanted more of what Hollywood had always made, entertainment films. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the kind of films that Hollywood would produce. Hollywood's first attempt to solve the problem of the fragmented audience was the problem picture. The problem picture. These films explored disturbing areas of American life, largely ignored in classic Hollywood films. They offered earnest portrayals of veterans struggling to adapt to their homecoming. They were exposés of the cruelties caused by racial or ethnic prejudice and anti-Semitism. They were also explorations of the sufferings of maltreated mental patients, revelations about the problems of alcohol and drug abuse, revelations about teenage gangs and the threats of nuclear destruction. If we could have the overhead projector, we're going to look at a few just little pictures from these social problem films. This is Gregory Peck struggling against anti-Semitism in Gentleman's Agreement. Robert Ryan plays a psychotic racist. Intruder in the Dust deals with racial prejudice in the South. So too did No Way Out also dealt with racial prejudice. The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. Here you see him disconnected from his children, obsessed by the tube. We once had a TV just like that, nice rounded picture. We're going to talk about Marlon Brando later. He's been accused of being a stool pigeon, and his pet pigeon has been murdered. Here you see Marlon Brando testifying before a jury. Baby Doll, dealing with sexual problems. A Face in the Crowd. That's Andy Griffith, if you remember him from Mayberry RFD. Here he plays a potential American fascist. A second attempt to mix seriousness and entertainment was the adult Western. These Westerns were often overlaid with pseudo-psychology. The most famous of the adult Westerns was High Noon. Here you see Gary Cooper trying to persuade his cowardly townspeople to take a stand against evil. Films like High Noon offered civics lessons, including lessons about racial prejudice. These pictures critiqued moral passivity, pride, selfishness. They moralized about the evils of class divisiveness, racial prejudice, and so forth. A third attempt to find an audience was the biblical epic. Let me show you a picture from these. You can see part of the appeal. This is Dorothy Lamour, Victor Mature, Yul Brynner. So the biblical epic, another way of appealing to the audience, was called the integrated musical, a musical filled with ballet sequences. Integrated musicals are narrative films in which the music and the dance numbers not only augment but also advance the action. They're integral to the development of the plot. The problem film, the adult Western, the biblical epic, and the serious musical have not withstood the test of time very well. Their common problem was that they didn't really address the audience's psychological needs. The central anxiety of the time was the fear that World War II had permanently altered the conditions of American life. There were 3 genres, however, that did address the problem of the time. And we're going to talk about these 3 crucial genres, 3 of Hollywood's most creative inventions. The first is called film noir, N-O-I-R. That's French for dark film. Then we're going to look at youth rebellion films. And then we're going to look at science fiction films that are much, much different than the kind we're familiar with. Film noir is easier to describe than it is to define. Film noir is a genre that depicts a world of shadows and ambiguities. It is characterized by a very complex style that features the following: looming close-ups, deep shadows, oblique camera angles, prowling cameras, crowded compositions. All of these features combine to produce a sense of entrapment. As you watch these pictures, you feel that there is no way out. Further, these movies seem to find it difficult to tell the stories in a straightforward manner. They generally use voice-over narratives and flashbacks. Above all, film noir depicts a strange world, a world of obsession, alienation, corruption, deceit, and blurred identity. Now, if we could have the overhead projector, please. These are some titles. These are some pictures of the advertisements for film noir. Naked Alibi, The Sniper, Pickup on South Street, Manhandled, Black Angel, Armored Car Robbery, The Crooked Way, Somewhere in the Night, The Big Combo, Roadblock, The Devil Thumbs a Ride, Blonde on Ice, Ice in her veins, icicles in her heart, The Crooked Web, Pushover, Scarlet Street, The Prowler, Shield for Murder, Touch of Evil, The Big Heat, Woman in Hiding, Two of a Kind. They go on. Sorry, Wrong Number, Out of the Past, The Damned Don't Cry, Raw Deal. As you look at those pictures, what strikes you about these film noir? What seem to be some of the defining characteristics of film noir? Let's focus in on Raw Deal. What kind of images does this give of us? What do they say about masculinity and femininity? Do they portray loving relationships among men and women? Strong sense of family ties? Are these films simple entertainment? What do they tell us? What do you think? Yes, please. Yes. Obsession, alienation, distance separating people. These are pictures that present a world of threatening shadows, of paranoia, of dementia, and inevitably murder. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do next is to look at a film clip from one of the most famous film noirs, one of the films that really defined the genre. It's called Double Indemnity. What's double indemnity? What does that word refer to, that phrase refer to?
When an insurance policy pays double for an accidental death.
Pays double for an accidental death, so maybe you wouldn't have such an accidental death. This film came out in 1944, and every turn and twist in the film is calculated and achieves its effects with the simplest of means. It's a tawdry thriller. It makes you feel dirty even as you watch it. And it's one of the greatest films that Hollywood ever made. It was directed by a refugee from Adolf Hitler's Germany, Billy Wilder, and it's written by Raymond Chandler, and it's based on a story by James M. Cain, who is one of the greatest writers of detective fiction in American literature. And if you've ever seen this movie, you will remember the characters' names as long as you live. Barbara Stanwyck plays Phyllis Dietrichson. She's platinum blonde. She wears tight white sweaters, an anklet, and sleazy, kinky shoes. She's the best acted and most fixating of all the slutty, cold-blooded femme fatales in the whole film noir genre. She has a bold stare that you'll see. She sneers at you. She wears too much lipstick. She has a thick-looking mouth. And she has strategically placed legs. She is a walking entrapment device. And the man who gets trapped in it is played by Fred MacMurray. Now, have you ever heard of Fred MacMurray? What role did he play that you know best?
My Three Sons?
Yeah, he played the father in My Three Sons. And here he's perfectly cast against type. He plays Walter Neff, an insurance salesman, and he is a patsy who's been ensnared into a plot to kill Phyllis Dietrichson's husband and collect on the double indemnity clause in the policy. Fred MacMurray always played good guys. He played regular guys. And so to cast against type is perfect, right? It's exactly what you do not expect. So if we could see this clip where he first meets Phyllis Dietrichson, please.
Mrs. Dietrichson, what is it?
How do you do, Mrs. Dietrichson? I'm Walter Neff, Pacific All Risk.
Pacific All what?
The Pacific All Risk Insurance Company. It's about some renewals on the automobiles. I've been trying to contact your husband for the past 2 weeks, but he's never in his office.
Is there anything I can do?
The insurance ran out on the 15th. I'd hate to think of you having a smashed fender or something while you're not fully covered.
Okay, let's stop right there. You see these style, terse phrases, all filled with double meanings. I mean, it's very, very powerful. It puts you into a nightmare world. What would be the appeal of film noir? Why would people want to see movies in which regular guys are entrapped in murder plots? Why would they like seeing femme fatales with no conscience? What's the attraction of these films, do you think? Why then?
Because most people are just regular people, and they'd like to imagine that that kind of danger and excitement could come into their lives.
I mean, that's a possibility.
Their lives could be transformed if...
But our lives are even more boring, and we don't have films like that. We like upbeat films. These are very pessimistic films, and they always end badly. One of the most famous is called The Postman Always Rings Twice. Even if you get away once, you're going to get caught, right? That's the message of these films. They're very pessimistic. What's the attraction, do you think? What's the appeal? Why, in this post-war period, would people look to film noir to meet their fantasies? Okay. Now, it's for me to say that we don't have a genre like film noir is not exactly true, because some of the most famous films of recent times have been film noir. You've probably seen Body Heat with Kathleen Turner. Chinatown has been one of the most influential remakes of a classic film noir. Film noir received its name from French critics, and its photography is heavily influenced by German filmmaking, German expressionist filmmaking. But the genre itself is entirely American. It is one of America's greatest contributions to the screen. And it reached its peak of popularity in the decade following World War II. Hundreds of Hollywood features combined crime, aberrant psychology, sexual insecurity, and bizarrely lit, nightmarish camera work. If we could have the overhead projector, I'm just going to show you a few scenes from film noir. See the shadows? See the cluttered composition? Ma, made it Ma, top of the world. Jimmy Cagney dying at the end of White Heat. Gun Crazy. Night in the City. Asphalt Jungle. Do these look like good fellas to you? I mean, these look like mean fellas to me. Does this look like a happily married couple? Or does this look more like your images of femme fatales, calculating men? Is this the typical Hollywood depiction of actresses? Is this the kind of camera work we usually think of in Hollywood films, where people in the background blur into each other? These people do not look happy, do they? This isn't your image of a happily married couple. This isn't even American Beauty, right? There's something even deeper about this. She's not very ladylike with her gun, I guess. Walk a Crooked Mile. Force of Evil. In a Lonely Place. Why all these films with the word evil in them? Why films with the word lonely in them? Farewell. Why all this pattern? Why this examination of abnormal psychology? What's going on? What's the attraction of this? Why are people interested in this? Any thoughts? I mean, what's interesting to me is that for a moment, for almost a decade, a certain kind of film touched people deeply. And then, after about the mid-1950s, film noir would disappear. Clearly, whatever it was that attracted people to film noir had disappeared. And it was gone. And then you don't see many of these films anymore. It's a very interesting genre. I think it's the most interesting genre Hollywood ever created. It's very, very striking. Let's look at another film clip of another important Hollywood film. This film is called Sunset Boulevard. And it's one of the most remarkable pictures that Hollywood ever produced because it's so negative about Hollywood's own past. Sunset Boulevard, as you all know, is a street in Los Angeles. And in this 1950 film, a young scriptwriter, played by William Holden, is speeding away from the finance company men who've come to repossess his car. After all, nothing worse could happen to you in Los Angeles than to have them take your car away from you. And so he turns into a driveway on Sunset Boulevard and finds himself in a decaying mansion. And inside that mansion, he finds a great silent movie star, Norma Desmond, played by a great silent film star, Gloria Swanson. And she's attended by her butler and her former director, Erich von Stroheim, who was a former Hollywood director, the greatest of the silent era, perhaps. She lives among the mementos of her past. She plots her comeback in her own adaptation of Salome. The rapacious old vamp persuades the young man to stay and work with her on her script. He becomes her kept man, her lover, her victim. The details in the film are incredibly baroque. There are rats in the empty swimming pool, the wind's moaning in the organ pipes. They bury a pet chimpanzee at midnight. It's a brittled tribute to Hollywood's past. It'd be hard to imagine Hollywood making a similar film now. If we could see the clip from Sunset Boulevard.
Him in the garden. Any city laws against that?
This is about burying the
Don't care
chimpanzee.
anyway. I want the coffin to be white, and I want it specially lined with satin. White or deep pink. Maybe red. Bright flaming red. Let's make it gay. How much will it be? I warn you, don't give me a fancy price just because I'm rich.
Lady, you got the wrong man. I had some trouble with my car, flat tire. I pulled into your garage until I could get a spare. I thought this was an empty house.
It is not. Get out.
I'm sorry. And I'm sorry you lost your friend. And I don't think red is the right color. Wait a minute, haven't I seen you before? I know your face.
Get out, or shall I call my servant?
You're Norma Desmond. Used to be in silent pictures. Used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Okay, let's stop right there. One of the most famous lines in all of Hollywood history. What's the appeal of a picture like that? I mean, it's hard to imagine Hollywood making such a picture. It's kind of grotesque, right? But it clearly struck a chord. It can be seen partly as a social problem film, that is, questioning how society treats aging women, but that's not its real appeal, right? There's something more about it. What's the appeal of this kind of film noir?
Does it contrast with the normal 1950s image of everything's good and happy and all that kind of?
Yes, no, there's clearly deep feelings of anxiety and maybe even guilt that people feel. And these pictures give voice to that. Let me just mention some of the things that I think contributed to film noir. One is that many returning GIs felt completely disoriented. They came to a society that was different from the society they had left. It's not just that they were older, but women's roles had changed. The roles and place of minorities in American society had dramatically changed. Sexual mores had changed. Young people were different, and it was hard to make sense of that. People were deathly afraid of nuclear weapons, and yet you couldn't talk publicly about that. So there's a deep, pervasive anxiety in American society, but it lurks under the surface. There was intense paranoia about communist subversion, a fear of subversion that was reinforced by congressional witch hunts. Women were much more independent than they had ever been in the past. This too produced anxiety in many men. So these films, I think, give metaphorical expression to anxieties that people found it very difficult to articulate. What I find interesting is that in our time, I don't think films really speak to the mood of people like us. But in the early 1950s, there's no question that film noir was able to express deep, repressed anxieties that people genuinely felt and went to motion pictures to see. Okay. Now, interest in noir would wane, and though the style never really died, it was preserved for the most part in critics' memories. And then in recent years, it has enjoyed a genuine comeback. But unlike the spontaneous expression of subconscious fears found in such films as Double Indemnity, The Big Sleep, Out of the Past, Asphalt Jungle, and Sunset Boulevard, more recent films like Chinatown, Body Heat, these were very self-consciously constructed. Noir is used today to explore the mind's scary side. Many of you have probably seen the film Blue Velvet. It's the story of a young college student whose infatuation with a troubled nightclub singer leads him into a small-town underworld, an underworld populated by dangerous obsessives. On a thematic level, Blue Velvet equates voyeurism with violence, infatuation with sadomasochism, physical illness with sociopathic behavior, and innocence with impossible dreams. Another film that many of you may have seen is called River's Edge, a sort of updated film noir. It's based on a true story. It studies the effect on a clique of working-class Northern California teenagers when one of the boys inexplicably murders his girlfriend. They don't know whether to report the crime or to protect their friend. They grow increasingly obsessive, increasingly destructive as their shared secret eats at them. What you have in these post-war films is a tone of pessimism that is very different from the generally upbeat films that we confront these days. Parents and adult authority figures in a film like River's Edge are self-absorbed, drugged, hypocritical. They offer no moral guideposts. The kids must work through layers of alienation before they can decide what's right or what's wrong, providing they don't kill each other first. So what film noir offers are psychosexual nightmares brought to the surface. And I think they're much more powerful than the kinds of light entertainment that we're typically exposed to today. The sociopathic and sexually perverse behavior so dear to film noir is very cathartic in a psychological sense. Now, film noir could take many different forms. There were film noir screwball comedies. Love triangles became the occasion for murder. There were film noir westerns. There were film noir problem pictures, where racial prejudice is rooted in private madness. There were even film noir musicals. The most famous was Judy Garland in A Star is Born, which explores the psychic costs of success. So what film noir did is it gave voice to a new post-war mood of pessimism, bleakness, chaos, and apprehension. We may associate the 1950s with the upbeat visions of shows like I Love Lucy. But what film noir makes clear is that for most Americans there was another layer hidden beneath that veneer, a veneer of pessimism and bleakness and anxiety and deep currents of guilt that film noir gave symbolic expression to. Let's stop there and then we'll go on the second half.